last lecture we have completed the point that is human female reproductive system, and in that we have studied different parts related to external genitalia, internal genitalia, structure and development of ovary and histology of ovary. So all the points related to human female reproductive system we have completed. From this human female reproductive system, the next point we have to study, that is menstrual cycle, which is also called as ovarian cycle, or which is also called as a female reproductive cycle. This menstrual cycle is observing in females on the onset of puberty. At the age of puberty, this cycle is going to be operated in human females. So first of all, we have to see the introductory points of this cycle, and then we have to study what are the different phases related to this menstrual cycle. So here are some introductory points. First, it is present in monkeys, apes and human beings. In other animals like monkeys and apes, this menstrual cycle is being present as in human beings. So this menstrual cycle is present in human beings, monkeys and apes. During this menstrual cycle, what happens to this female reproductive system? That is, there are number of changes taking place in the ovary as well as in the uterus. So here it involves series of cyclic changes in the ovary and uterus. During this menstrual cycle, cyclic changes are occurring in ovary and uterus. The different hormones which are secreted by our pituitary gland, it is responsible for the developmental changes in the ovary, and the hormones which are secreted by the ovary are responsible for the developmental changes in the uterus. So here these changes takes place under the effect of gonadotropins and the ovarian hormones respectively. Gonadotropins, as we have studied in the control coordination topic, the gonadotropins are secreted by our pituitary gland. So by the pituitary hormones, that is gonadotropins, the developmental changes are going to take place in the ovary, and then ovarian hormones are secreted by the ovarian, which are responsible for the developmental changes in the uterus. So here the changes in ovary and changes in uterus are taking place during this menstrual cycle, and these hormones are, here we can see the hormones FSH, LH, estrogen and progesterone are responsible for these cyclic changes. The gonadotropins here, the FSH and LH, these are the gonadotropins which are secreted by pituitary gland, and this estrogen and progesterone are the ovarian hormones which are secreted by the ovary. All these four hormones are responsible for maintaining this menstrual cycle. Now, what are the different phases of this menstrual cycle that we have to study? Before that, there are some points here. Menstrual cycle starts at the time of puberty. म्हणजे वयात आल्यानंतर मुलींच्या मध्ये आपल्याला ही सायकल स्टार्ट झालेली बघायला मिळते, आणि दिस सायकल इज रिपीटेड इन एव्हरी मंथ अँड इट इज अबाउट 28 days. दिस menstrual cycle is continued cyclically from one month to second month, about 28 days. After every 28 days, this menstrual cycle is going to be repeated. When the menstrual cycle is started in the female body, that condition is called as a menarche. So here starting of the cycle is called as a menarche, and at the age of 45 to 55, this cycle is going to be stopped, and this stopping of the menstrual cycle, it is called as a menopause. म्हणजे वयात आल्यानंतर ज्यावेळेला ही सायकल स्टार्ट होते त्या पॉइंटला इथे काय म्हणलेलं आहे, मेनार्च म्हणलेलं आहे, आणि 45 ते 55 ह्या एजमध्ये ही मेन्स्ट्रुअल सायकल फिमेल बॉडीमध्ये स्टॉप होते. दॅट कंडिशन इज कॉल्ड एज अ मेनोपॉज. सो वी हॅव टू रिमेंबर, मेनार्च मीन्स स्टार्टिंग ऑफ द मेन्स्ट्रुअल सायकल and menopause means stopping of the menstrual cycle. So in the next point we have to study the different phases of this menstrual cycle. So here the menstrual phase, first is the menstrual phase which is about first to fourth day of the menstrual cycle. पहिल्या 4 दिवसांमध्ये फेज बघायला मिळते. सेकंड फेज follicular or proliferative phase which is about 5th to 13th day of the menstrual cycle. Then ovulatory phase 14th day of the menstrual cycle, and lastly here secretary or luteal phase, which is 15th to 28th day. So here again from after 28th day the first phase is repeated. After completion of first phase, second phase नंतर third, after third fourth phase. After completion of fourth phase, again first phase is repeated. So here in this way all these four phases are repeatedly occurring during this menstrual cycle. Now we have to study different phases and related information about those phases. So first is the menstrual phase, which is also called as a bleeding phase, which is present between first day of the menstrual cycle up to the fourth day of the menstrual cycle. So what happens during this phase? Here bleeding through vagina indicates the beginning of this phase. Means here during this menstrual phase, bleeding from the vagina, as we have studied the internal genitalia of the female reproductive system, it is an opening present in this internal female reproductive system. Through that vaginal opening bleeding starts. Why the bleeding is started here? Because it occurs in the absence of fertilization. There is no fertilization of the ovum or egg, and therefore that ovum getting degenerated and the endometrial wall which is present in the uterus, these also gets degenerated, and due to this degeneration of ovum and degeneration of endometrium, bleeding occurs through the vagina. So here this endometrium of uterus breaks down under the effect of prostaglandins released due to the decreased level of the progesterone and estrogen. So what happens if there is no fertilization of the ovum or egg? There is a decrease in the level of estrogen and progesterone in the female body, and due to decreasing estrogen and progesterone level, there is increase in prostaglandin secretion, and due to this prostaglandin secretion, the endometrial wall inside the uterus is going to break, and therefore the bleeding occurs here. And this menstrual flow consists of secretion from the endometrial glands, cell debris, blood and unfertilized ovum. काय असतं त्या menstrual flow मध्ये? तर endometrial gland ज्या ब्रेक झालेल्या आहेत त्या आपल्याला बघायला मिळतात. अनफर्टिलाइज्ड ओव्हम जो आहे तो डिजनरेट झालेला तो बघायला मिळतो. त्याचबरोबर सेल डेब्रिस, पेशींचा काही कचरा आणि ब्लड, अँड देअरफॉर ब्लीडिंग शोज रेड कलर्ड फ्लुइड that is coming outside the vaginal opening, and that is called as a bleeding phase. So at this stage the endometrium wall of the uterus is going to be breaked and therefore bleeding occurs. So here lack of menstruation may be indicative of pregnancy. Suppose there is pregnancy conceived, what happens? There is no degeneration of the ovum and there is no degeneration of the endometrium walls present in the uterus, and therefore there is no bleeding, and therefore the menstrual cycle is going to be stopped. ज्या वेळेला प्रेग्नन्सी राहिलेली असते त्यावेळेला प्रोजेस्टेरॉन अँड इस्ट्रोजेन सिक्रेशन इज ॲट इन्क्रीज्ड लेवल and no secretion of prostaglandin, and therefore no menstrual phase or no bleeding phase is observed. Hence menstrual cycle is getting stopped up to the completion of the pregnancy. So here the lack of menstruation is indicative of the pregnancy. म्हणजे जर menstrual phase दिसली नाही तर याचा अर्थ आपण काय घ्यायचं आहे की तिथे प्रेग्नन्सी कन्सिव्ह झालेली आहे. But here it may be caused due to stress or poor health condition. पण काही वेळेस जर अशक्त शरीर असेल, म्हणजे व्यवस्थित जर वाढ झालेली नसेल आपल्या शरीराची किंवा खाणंपिणं व्यवस्थित नसेल त्या फिमेलचं, तर त्या पुअर हेल्थमुळं आपल्याला ही कंडिशन बघायला मिळते. म्हणजे तिथं प्रेग्नन्सी असेलच असं नाही. ड्यू टू दी स्ट्रेस, काही वेळेला ताणतणाव काहीतरी असतात मुलींच्यामध्ये आणि त्या ताणतणावामुळं हार्मोनल इम्बॅलन्स होतो शरीरामध्ये, अँड ड्यू टू दॅट हार्मोनल इम्बॅलन्स ऑल्सो there may be stopping of this menstrual cycle, or there is no menstrual phase or the no bleeding phase observed. That means it does not like the pregnancy is conceived. म्हणजे त्याच्यामध्ये प्रेग्नन्सीज राहिली असल्यामुळं menstrual cycle दिसत नाही असा अर्थ होत नाही. काही फिमेल्समध्ये पुअर हेल्थमुळे किंवा स्ट्रेस कंडिशनमध्ये दिस menstrual cycle is not operated मंथ बाय मंथ. म्हणजे व्यवस्थित मंथली ही मेन्स्ट्रुअल सायकल तिथं बघायला मिळायला पाहिजे, ती बघायला मिळू शकत नाही. So here we have to understand these points. So here during menstrual flow about 35 to 45 ml of blood is lost. Means this phase is occurring in 4 days, and during that 4 days about 35 to 45 ml is blood lost from the female body. So due to this condition the females are showing some weak conditions during this menstrual phase, and the thickness of the endometrium becomes 1 mm. So due to this menstrual phase the endometrium wall which is present in the inside the uterus, that is showing the wall which is having the thickness 1 mm. म्हणजे इथं गर्भाशयाचा आतलं जे अस्तर असतं एंडोमेट्रियल वॉल म्हणजे काय, गर्भाशयाचा आतमधला लेयर, त्यात आतमधला असणारा जो अस्तर आहे त्याला म्हटलं जातं. and that endometrial wall is becoming here only 1 mm in thickness. So this is all about the first phase of the menstrual cycle, that is bleeding phase or menstrual phase. During this phase the secretion of the progesterone and estrogen is decreased and the prostaglandin secretion is increased. That we have to remember the hormonal role during this phase. Now the second phase we have to study. The second phase has two names. First is the follicular phase and second is the proliferative phase, which is occurring between 5th day to 13th day of the cycle. In this follicular phase is occurring in the ovary and proliferative phase is occurring in the uterus. So here this follicular phase in ovary, it is called as the ovarian changes, and proliferative phase, that is called as the uterine changes. Simultaneously the changes are taking place in the uterus as well as in the ovary. First we have to see what changes are taking place in the ovary. So here during this phase the new primordial follicle in the ovary starts developing, and due to the action of FSH from the pituitary the primordial follicle starts into developmental changes, and this FSH acts on these ovarian follicles, that is primordial follicles, and these primordial follicles are converted into secondary follicle, then tertiary follicle, and lastly mature Graafian follicle is formed due to the action of follicle stimulating hormone secreted by the pituitary gland. So here in ovary primordial follicle is changes into the Graafian follicle. That changes are taking place in the ovary, and only one follicle develops in one cycle. Means when right ovary develops a Graafian follicle, next month left ovary develops one follicle. Again third month right ovary develops one follicle. Fourth month left ovary develops one follicle. Means एका वेळेला एका ओव्हरी मधून एकच फॉलिकल डेव्हलप होत असतो आणि एकच मॅच्युअर ग्राफियन फॉलिकल तयार होत असतो. हे इथे लक्षात ठेवायचं आहे. आणि ते ॲक्शन कुठल्या हार्मोनचे होते, फॉलिकल स्टिम्युलेटिंग हार्मोन और विच इज कॉल्ड एज अ गोनेडोट्रोपिक हार्मोन सिक्रेटेड बाय द anterior pituitary gland. That you have to remember for this one. So this is the first phase, that is follicular phase. Now what happens to the uterus, that is proliferative phase in uterus, or we can call it as a uterine changes. It is undergo proliferation, means the endometrial wall which is becoming 1 mm in thickness, that thickness of the endometrial wall is going to be increased during this phase, and therefore it is called as a proliferative phase. So here estrogen is secreted by the follicular cells of the ovary and it stimulates the endometrial glands. Means what happens in ovary, the follicular cells are present around the follicle, and these follicular cells are secreting estrogen hormone, and due to the action of estrogen hormone the endometrial glands which are present in the uterus are start to be growing, and due to the growth of endometrial glands here it causes the repairing of endometrium, and the thickness of endometrium grows about 3 mm in thickness under the influence of estrogen. Means पहिल्या फेज मध्ये जो 1 मिलीमीटरचा जो एंडोमेट्रियम वॉल राहिलेला होता त्याचीच इतर जाडी काय केली जाते, वाढली जाते. 1 मिलीमीटरची जाडी किती होते, 3 मिलीमीटर मध्ये कन्वर्ट केली जाते, and this is due to the action of estrogen which is secreted by the ovary. So in uterine changes role of estrogen is very important. the repairing of endometrium of the uterus is taking place with the help of the estrogen, which is secreted by the follicular cells of the ovary. So here in this second phase, in ovary, ovarian changes are taking place. Primordial follicle is converted into Graafian follicle with the help of gonadotropic hormone, that is FSH, from the anterior pituitary gland, and second change in the uterus, that is endometrium wall, is going to be increased. Its thickness is becoming 3 mm in thickness by the hormone estrogen, which is secreted by the ovary. म्हणजे ह्या दुसऱ्या फेज मध्ये ओव्हरी मध्ये चेंजेस होतात, ग्राफियन फॉलिकल तयार होतो आणि युटेरसचा जो आतला लेयर आहे त्याचा थिकनेस वाढला जातो. सो ऑल दीज चेंजेस आर टेकिंग प्लेस इन दिस सेकंड फेज. नाउ द थर्ड फेज हियर, बिफोर दैट, for follicular phase, for the NEET exam, some important points are there. The ovarian and uterine changes are induced by the changes in the level of pituitary and ovarian hormones. Just we have seen the ovarian changes and uterine changes are taking place with the help of these hormones, means pituitary hormones and ovarian hormones. So here the secretion of gonadotropins, that is LH and FSH, increases during follicular phase. That we have to remember. During follicular phase, the level of FSH or LH is going to be increased and it stimulates the follicular cells as well as secretion of estrogen by the growing follicles. So these hormones FSH and LH are also stimulating the follicular cells to secrete the estrogen. So here both LH and FSH attain a peak level in the middle of the menstrual cycle, that is about 14th day. जे बरोबर मेन्स्ट्रुअल सायकलचा जो मध्य आहे, 28 दिवसांची सायकल बघितली तर मध्य कुठे येणार आहे? 14 14 आणि 28. तर 14व्या दिवशी जर बघितलं तर LH आणि FSH चं सिक्रेशन अतिशय हाय लेवलला किंवा पीक लेवलला आपल्याला झालेलं बघायला मिळतं. सो हियर these both points which are underlined are very much important for the NEET exam, that we have to remember very carefully. Okay, now the third stage here is ovulatory phase, which is the 14th day of the cycle. This phase is occurring during the 14th day of the cycle. What happens during this phase? It is called as the ovulatory phase. Means at this stage or at this phase, ovulation takes place. Means mature Graafian follicle ruptures and developed ovum or egg, that is called as a secondary oocyte, and that is coming outside the Graafian follicle, and that step is called as ovulation. So here the mature Graafian follicle ruptures due to the action of LH, that is luteinizing hormone secreted by the pituitary, that is called as LH surge, and ovum is discharged into the abdominal cavity, that means in the fallopian tube, and this is occurring due to the action of LH, that is luteinizing hormone. The luteinizing hormone is at the peak level at this middle of this menstrual cycle, that is the 14th day of the menstrual cycle, during which ovulation occurs, mature Graafian follicle ruptures, and the ovum or egg, which is called as a secondary oocyte, that is getting released from the ovary and it is coming into the fallopian tube. This process or mechanism is occurring during this third phase. Now the fourth phase here, luteal phase or secretory phase. Luteal phase is occurring again in the ovary and secretory phase is occurring in the uterus. So simultaneously in ovary and in uterus these changes are going to be takes place. Luteal phase, that is ovarian changes, and secretory phase, that is uterine changes. These changes are occurring in between 15th day of the menstrual cycle up to the 28th day. म्हणजे 15व्या दिवसापासून 28व्या दिवसापर्यंत ओव्हरी मध्ये काही चेंजेस होतात, युटेरस मध्ये काही चेंजेस होतात. ओव्हरी मधल्या चेंजेसला ल्युटियल फेज म्हणलेला आहे आणि युटेरस मधल्या चेंजेसला इथं काय म्हणलेलं आहे? सिक्रेटरी फेज म्हणलेला आहे. सो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल वी हॅव टू सी इन द चेंजेस ऑफ द ओव्हरी. सो व्हॉट हॅपन्स? द एम्प्टी ग्राफियन फॉलिकल डेव्हलप्स इनटू ए येलो बॉडी, that is called as a corpus luteum. When ovulation takes place, ovum or egg is released from the Graafian follicle. That Graafian follicle becomes empty, म्हणजे तो रिकामा होतो, and that empty Graafian follicle is then converted into a yellow body structure, and that is called as a corpus luteum. And this corpus luteum is responsible for secretion of the progesterone hormone, which is maintaining the pregnancy. So here it acts as a temporary endocrine gland which secretes progesterone for the maintenance of the endometrium. This progesterone hormone is responsible for maintaining the endometrium wall of the uterus, and which is very much essential to maintain the pregnancy. म्हणजे ह्या प्रोजेस्टेरॉनचा रोल काय आहे बघा, इथं जो आतला एंडोमेट्रियम वॉल आहे गर्भाशयाच्या आतलं जे अस्तर आहे ते प्रॉपर मेंटेन ठेवणे. कारण जर गर्भ राहिला तर तो गर्भ कुठं स्थिरावणार आहे किंवा त्याच्या वाढीसाठी तो गर्भ कुठे येणार आहे, युटेरसमध्ये येणार आहे. आणि त्याच्यामुळे कॉर्पस ल्युटियम काय करतो, इथं प्रोजेस्टेरॉन नावाचं प्रेग्नन्सी हार्मोन सिक्रेट करतो. इट इज ॲक्टिंग ॲज अ टेम्पररी एंडोक्राइन ग्लँड. इट इज प्रेझेंट अप टू 3rd month of the pregnancy. When placenta is formed, this corpus luteum gets degenerated. But up to the 3rd month of the pregnancy, this corpus luteum is very much functional and it is secreting the progesterone hormone. And here formation of corpus luteum takes place. Therefore, this phase is called as the luteal phase. That we have to remember. Means during 15th to 28th day of the cycle, what happens? Empty Graafian follicle converts into corpus luteum. Corpus luteum is secreting progesterone hormone. These are the changes in the ovary. Now what happens to uterus? So here one point remaining. If ovum is fertilized, the corpus luteum is retained. The hormone luteinizing LH and luteotropic hormone LTH from pituitary gland helps in the maintenance of the corpus luteum. If suppose the pregnancy is conceived, then corpus luteum is formed, and for the maintenance of corpus luteum, again 2 hormones are secreted by pituitary gland, that is LH luteinizing hormone and LTH luteotropic hormone. This luteotropic hormone, it is also act as a lactogenic hormone, or it is also acting as a prolactin that we have studied in the hormonal coordination topic. So this LH and LTH, both hormones are responsible for maintaining the corpus luteum when the pregnancy is conceived or fertilization of the ovum is taking place. So this point is also important for the NEET exam. And suppose if ovum is not fertilized, then what happens to that corpus luteum? When there is no fertilization, means where there is no pregnancy, this corpus luteum is getting converted into a white scar which is called as a corpus albicans. So what happens? If there is no fertilization, the corpus luteum is degenerates and it forms a white scar. म्हणजे तो corpus luteum degenerate होतो आणि तिथे एक व्हाईट कलरचं स्कार म्हणजे एक व्हाईट कलरचे चिन्ह तयार होते. And that white scar is called as a corpus albicans. So here are 2 conditions. First condition, if fertilization occurs, and second condition, if fertilization not occur. If fertilization occur, corpus luteum form and it secretes progesterone for the maintenance of pregnancy. And if there is no fertilization, corpus luteum gets degenerated and white scar, corpus albicans is formed. So this is the ovarian changes. Now what happens to uterus during this 4th phase? So here this is called as a secretory phase or uterine changes, because in the uterus the endometrium wall is secreting some secretion and therefore it is called as a secretory phase. So what happens here? Under the influence of progesterone there is increase in the endometrial thickness. म्हणजे जर प्रेग्नन्सी राहिली असेल तर प्रोजेस्टेरॉन हार्मोन सिक्रेट केला जातो आणि दॅट प्रोजेस्टेरॉन इज रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर इन्क्रीजिंग द थिकनेस ऑफ द एंडोमेट्रियम. जो थिकनेस 3 मिलीमीटरचा आहे तो जवळजवळ 5 मिलीमीटरचा वाढवला जातो ह्या फेजमध्ये, ह्या शेवटच्या फेजमध्ये. सो हिअर एंडोमेट्रियल ग्लँड्स ग्रो अँड बिकम सिक्रेटरी अँड दे आर सिक्रेटिंग फ्लुइड रिच इन ग्लायकोजेन फॉर नरिशिंग दी dividing embryo. So suppose there is pregnancy conceived or the embryo is formed, and to nourish the embryo म्हणजे त्या गर्भाला अन्न देण्यासाठी किंवा त्याला नरिश करण्यासाठी, त्याला वाढवण्यासाठी एंडोमेट्रियम वॉल्स जी वॉल आहे तिथे जे ग्लँड्स आहेत त्या एंडोमेट्रियल ग्लँड्स काय केले जातात, तिथं वाढल्या जातात. अँड दे आर सिक्रेटिंग अ फ्लुइड विच इज रिच इन ग्लायकोजेन, बिकॉज ग्लायकोजेन इज द फूड मटेरियल सोर्स फॉर दॅट डिवाइडिंग embryo. So here these endometrial glands are growing very fastly and they are secreting glycogen rich fluid and that is nourished to the developing embryo if there is pregnancy occurring. So here these endometrium walls or the endometrial glands are growing on and they are secreting this glycogen-rich fluid, and then this progesterone hormone is responsible for the maintenance of the pregnancy. So in this phase, if pregnancy is occurring, the progesterone hormone is playing a rare role for the maintenance of this pregnancy. The ovulated egg gets fertilized, the embryo is implanted, there is secretion of human chorionic. What happens you see here, the ovulated egg is suppose fertilized, the embryo is formed and that embryo is going towards the uterus, then this embryo secretes human chorionic gonadotropin, that is called as HCG. Always H is written as a small letter and C and G is written as a capital letter. So if suppose there is pregnancy is conceived and embryo is formed, then during this phase the embryo is secreting this hormone, human chorionic gonadotropin, which extends the life of corpus luteum and stimulates the secretory activity. Means जर गर्भ राहिला असेल तर त्या गर्भाकडूनच काय केलं जातं, हा हार्मोन सिक्रेट केला जातो, ह्यूमन कोरियोनिक गोनाडोट्रोपिन, that is called as HCG. What plays this hormone? This hormone is responsible for the maintenance of the corpus luteum or for the functioning of the corpus luteum. हा ह्यूमन कोरियोनिक गोनाडोट्रोपिन काय करतो, कॉर्पस ल्युटियमचं फंक्शनिंग काय करतो, कंटिन्यू करतो, त्याची जी सिक्रेशनची ॲक्टिव्हिटी आहे प्रोजेस्टेरॉन सिक्रेशनची ॲक्टिव्हिटी ती कंटिन्यू करतो, त्यामुळं गर्भ जो आहे तो व्यवस्थित तिथं मेंटेन राहतो त्या पिरियडमध्ये. सो हिअर प्रेझेन्स ऑफ HCG इन मॅटर्नल ब्लड अँड युरिन इज अन इंडिकेटर ऑफ द प्रेग्नन्सी. सो ड्युरिंग फर्स्ट फेज ऑफ दिस प्रेग्नन्सी हाऊ वी हॅव टू आयडेंटिफाय आयदर द female is pregnant or not. So during this first phase of this pregnancy, the level of HCG in blood or in urine is increased in the females because the developing embryo is secreting this hormone HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin hormone चा लेवल जो आहे तो त्या फिमेल बॉडीमध्ये आपल्याला वाढलेला बघायला मिळतो. जर आपण त्यांचं ब्लड चेक केलं किंवा युरिन चेक केलं तर त्याच्यामध्ये आपल्याला HCG लेवल वाढलेली बघायला मिळेल आणि HCG लेवल वाढलेली आहे याचाच अर्थ आपण काय सांगू शकतो की दॅट फिमेल इज प्रेग्नेंट. सो हिअर दिस लेवल ऑफ HCG व्हेन इन्क्रीज्ड इन ब्लड और युरिन इट इज इंडिकेशन ऑफ प्रेग्नन्सी. अँड इफ सपोज देर इज नो फर्टिलायझेशन, व्हॉट हॅपन्स, देर इज नो formation of corpus luteum or no secretion of progesterone, and then after decreased level of progesterone, prostaglandin is secreted and again the first phase of the menstrual cycle begins, that is bleeding phase. म्हणजे काय होतं, जर 28 दिवस झाल्यानंतर 14व्या दिवशी ओव्युलेशन होतं, त्याच्यानंतर जर फर्टिलायझेशन झालं नाही तर 28व्या दिवसापर्यंत काय केलं जातं, हे चेंजेस तिथं होत असतात. पण फर्टिलायझेशन न झाल्यामुळं काय होतं, कॉर्पस ल्युटियम नंतर डिजनरेट होतो. कॉर्पस ल्युटियम डिजनरेट झाल्यामुळं प्रोजेस्टेरॉनचं सिक्रेशन कमी होतं. प्रोजेस्टेरॉनचं सिक्रेशन कमी झाल्यामुळे प्रोस्टाग्लॅन्डिनचं सिक्रेशन वाढतं आणि प्रोस्टाग्लॅन्डिनचं सिक्रेशन वाढल्यामुळे ॲटोमॅटिकली एंडोमेट्रियम वॉल काय होते, ब्रेक होते. त्याचबरोबर ओव्हम जो आहे तो डिजनरेट होतो आणि ब्लिडिंग ऑकर्स थ्रू वजायना, म्हणजे पुन्हा पहिली स्टेज तिथं आपल्याला बघायला मिळते. पुन्हा पहिला दिवस येतो मेन्स्ट्रुअल सायकलचा, 1 ते 4 दिवसामध्ये ब्लिडिंग होतं. पुन्हा 5 ते 13 दिवसामध्ये पुन्हा ओव्हॅरियन चेंजेस होतात, युटेराइन चेंजेस होतात आणि पुन्हा 14व्या दिवशी आपल्याला ओव्युलेशन झालेलं बघायला मिळतं. पुन्हा 15 ते 23 दिवसांमध्ये पुन्हा कॉर्पस ल्युटियम तयार होतो. जर प्रेग्नन्सी कन्सीव्ह असेल तर दॅट कॉर्पस ल्युटियम इज मेंटेनिंग द प्रेग्नन्सी अँड इफ देअर इज नो फर्टिलायझेशन, नो प्रेग्नन्सी, अगेन दॅट ओव्हम gets denatured or disintegrated and uterine wall also getting disintegrated. So here in this way the menstrual cycles points we have completed. Now we have to see the diagrammatic representation also. So here the phases are given here, the gonadotropin hormone levels in this column, then ovarian cycle is showing at the second row, then ovarian hormone levels are in third row, and then uterine cycle is in this fourth, and here the menstrual cycle phases. So from 0 to 5 म्हणजे पहिल्या दिवसापासून 5व्या दिवसापर्यंत इथे जर बघितलं तर मेन्सेस असं म्हणलेलं आहे. मेन्सेस म्हणजे मेन्स्ट्रुअल फ्लोमधून जो ब्लड आणि जे काही टिश्यू बाहेर टाकला जातो एंडोमेट्रियल टिश्यू त्याला मेन्सेस म्हटलं जातं. त्यावेळेला ऑटोमॅटिकली युटेराइन वॉल काय होत जाते, कमी होत जाते. इथे आपण बघितलं तर कमी होत जाते. इस्ट्रोजनचं लेवल कमी झालेलं आहे, प्रोजेस्टेरॉनचं लेवल कमी झालेलं आहे आणि त्यामुळे एंडोमेट्रियल वॉल कमी होत जाते. इथं काही चेंजेस आपल्याला बघायला मिळत नाहीत. FSH आणि LH कमी असतो. सेकंड फेज बघा, प्रॉलिफरेटिव्ह फेज जर बघितलं 5 ते 14 दिवसांमध्ये हळूहळू पुन्हा एंडोमेट्रियल वॉल इथं वाढलेली बघायला मिळते आणि पुन्हा हळूहळू प्रोजेस्टेरॉनचं सिक्रेशन वाढतं, इस्ट्रोजनचं सिक्रेशन वाढतं. FSH आणि LH आहे असंच असतो आणि त्याच वेळेला इथं प्रॉलिफरेटिव्ह फेज आपल्याला बघायला मिळतं. हा ओव्हिल जो आहे प्रायमरी फॉलिकलचं सेकंडरीचं टर्शियरी आणि टर्शियरीचं इथं मॅच्युअर ग्राफियन फॉलिकल तयार होतं. अँड ॲट द 14th डे 14व्या दिवशी काय होतं बघा, ओव्युलेशन. ग्राफियन फॉलिकलमधून ओव्हिल काय होतं, बाहेर पडतो. त्याच वेळेला इथं LH जो आहे त्याचं एकदम हाय सिक्रेशन आपल्याला झालेलं बघायला मिळतं. सो LH सर्ज इथं म्हणलेलं आहे. LH इज सिक्रेटेड ॲट द हाय लेवल अँड देन द सिक्रेटरी फेज फ्रॉम 14th डे टू 28th डे पुन्हा एंडोमेट्रियल वॉल अशी वाढत झालेली बघायला मिळते. म्हणजे थिकनेस जो आहे तो वाढलेला बघायला मिळतो. प्रोजेस्टेरॉनची लेवल वाढलेली असते, इस्ट्रोजनची लेवल पुन्हा कमी झालेली असते. अँड दिस ग्राफियन फॉलिकल इज कन्वर्टेड इंटू येलो बॉडी दॅट इज कॉल्ड एज अ कॉर्पस ल्युटियम as we have seen here. And this LH is as it is, this is called as a luteal phase. If the pregnancy occurs, corpus luteum remains as it is, and if there is no pregnancy, the corpus luteum is getting converted into white scar that is called as a corpus albicans. So this is another diagram we have to see here. This is the menstrual phase, this is ovulatory phase, this is ovulation, and it is post-ovulatory phase. What happens you see here? First to 4th day menstruation, thickness of the endometrium totally going on decreasing, and pro-ovulatory phase मध्ये काय होतं, proliferation पुन्हा स्टार्ट होतं. इथं इस्ट्रोजन सिक्रेट केलं जातं आणि साइड बाय साइड प्रायमरी फॉलिकलचं कन्वर्जन सेकंडरीमध्ये होतं, सेकंडरीचं टर्शियरीमध्ये होतं आणि टर्शियरीमध्ये ओव्युलेशन होतं. ओव्हम बाहेर पडतो बघा during this ovulation 14th day of the cycle. And after ovulation this converts into corpus luteum. Again the endometrial wall starts thickening and corpus luteum maintains, and if there is no fertilization corpus luteum is converted into corpus albicans and again menstruation first phase, that is the first day of the menstrual cycle is repeated. So during this the hormones which are playing very important role from the anterior pituitary, FSH and LH are playing role for the maturation of this Graafian follicle and for the ovulation. LH is responsible, and for the development of the primordial follicles FSH is responsible. That we have to remember. So in this way this menstrual cycle is completed. So related to that there is one question: a temporary endocrine gland in human is dash dash dash. So here pineal gland, corpus luteum, corpus cardaceum, cardiacum and corpus albicans. So temporary endocrine gland is corpus luteum. So here option is the B, corpus luteum. So in this way first question we have seen. Now second question, select an incorrect statement. Incorrect statement: LH and FSH triggers ovulation in ovary. LH and FSH decrease gradually during the follicular phase. LH triggers secretion of androgen from the Leydig cell, and FSH stimulates the Sertoli cells which help in the spermiogenesis. 4 options are given. Incorrect statement we have to identify. So what happens here? The last sentence we have seen: FSH stimulates the Sertoli cells and which help in the spermiogenesis म्हणलेला आहे. LH triggers and secretion of the androgen from the Leydig cell. हे बरोबर आहे. LH and FSH decreases gradually during the follicular phase. आणि LH and FSH triggers ovulation in the ovary. पहिलं सेंटेन्स बरोबर आहे. आता दुसरं जर तुम्ही बघितलं LH and FSH decreases म्हणलेलं आहे. follicular phase वेळेला decrease होतं का increase होतं? As just we have seen in the second phase of the menstrual cycle, this LH and FSH gradually increases पाहिजे. इथं काय सांगितलेलं आहे डिक्रीजेस, त्यामुळे इनकरेक्ट स्टेटमेंट कुठलं येणार आहे, हे इनकरेक्ट स्टेटमेंट येणार आहे. बाकीचे 3 जे आहेत ते करेक्ट स्टेटमेंट्स आपण बघू शकतो. इथं या पॉईंटचा अर्थ जो आहे FSH स्टिम्युलेट द सर्क्युलरी सेल्स विच हेल्प इन द स्पर्मिओजेनेसिस. व्हॉट इज मीन बाय स्पर्मिओजेनेसिस हा पॉईंट आपण नंतरच्या लेक्चरला बघणार आहे. त्यावेळेला तुम्हाला हा पॉईंट क्लिअर होईल की स्पर्मिओजेनेसिसच्या वेळेला FSHचा रोल काय काम करतो. बट दिस इज द करेक्ट स्टेटमेंट. इनकरेक्ट स्टेटमेंट इज दिस सेकंड स्टेटमेंट. So this is the answer. Now another question here. Change in the GnRH. GnRH is gonadotropin hormones. Pulse frequency in females is controlled by circulating levels of GnRH secretion किंवा changes जे आहेत ते कोण कंट्रोल करतं असं विचारलेलं आहे. इस्ट्रोजन इनहिबिन, प्रोजेस्टेरॉन ओनली, प्रोजेस्टेरॉन इनहिबिन आणि इस्ट्रोजन अँड प्रोजेस्टेरॉन. Which hormones are responsible for controlling the GnRH? So what will be the correct answer here? The estrogen and progesterone, because when there is secretion of estrogen and progesterone, there is low secretion of gonadotropin hormones, that is GnRH, and when there is low secretion of progesterone and estrogen, there is high level of gonadotropin hormone, that is FSH and LH. That means their feedback mechanism is seen in these hormones, that is GnRH and this estrogen and progesterone. Okay. Now another question here. Which of the following events is not associated with the ovulation in the human female? कुठला इव्हेंट असोसिएट नाही असं विचारलेलं आहे. डिक्रीज इन इस्ट्राडायल, फुल डेव्हलपमेंट ऑफ ग्राफियन फॉलिकल, रिलीज ऑफ सेकंडरी ओसाइट अँड LH सर्ज. बघा मेन्स्ट्रुअल सायकलच्या रिलेटेड किंवा ओव्युलेशनच्या रिलेटेड ह्यातला कुठला ऑप्शन नाही. ओव्युलेशनच्या वेळेला LH सर्ज असतो, रिलीज होतं सेकंडरी ओसाइट, फुल डेव्हलपमेंट ऑफ ग्राफियन फॉलिकल आपल्याला बघायला मिळतं अँड डिक्रीज इन इस्ट्रोडायल. सो हिअर ऑप्शन इज द डिक्रीज इन इस्ट्रोडायल बिकॉज इस्ट्रोडायल लेवल फॉल आफ्टर ओव्युलेशन विच रिझल्ट्स इन द सीसेशन ऑफ द मेन्स्ट्रुएशन. सो दिस इस्ट्रोडायल डिक्रीज इज नॉट associated with the ovulation. So when ovulation is occurring, there is increase in estradiol. It is the correct point. When there is increase in estradiol, there is ovulation taking place. So this is the question. Now next question, menstrual flow occurs due to lack of. का menstrual flow होतो, काय lack होतं तिथं? Progesterone, FSH, oxytocin आणि vasopressin. So what will be the answer here? As we know, the progesterone is absent, then menstruation occurs because progesterone is maintaining the pregnancy. So menstrual flow occurs due to the lack of the progesterone. Okay. Next question: which part of the ovary in mammals acts as an endocrine gland after ovulation? After ovulation, which part is acting as an endocrine part? So here, Graafian follicle, stroma, germinal epithelium, vital and membrane. What is the answer here? Graafian follicle, because Graafian follicle is converted into corpus luteum and that corpus luteum is secreting progesterone only. Okay. Now next question, ovulation occurs under the influence of LH, FSH, estrogen, progesterone. What happens during ovulation? LH surge is taking place, means there is increased level of LH. So here is the first option, LH is the correct answer. So in this way we have completed about all the points related to the menstrual cycle, different phases of menstrual cycle and all the different MCQs which are asked in last NEET exams. So I hope you understand what is the menstrual cycle and different phases. The next point we have to study in the next lecture. Thank you.